Hello and welcome to Knowing Me, Knowing UKSG, a podcast exploring journeys in scholarly communications. In each episode, we hear from someone inspiring from the knowledge community and ask them to tell us about their career journey and what has motivated them along the way.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the UKSG podcast, Knowing Me, Knowing UKSG. Today, I'm with Claire Sewell, who is the head of Research Information Service at the House of Commons. Welcome, Claire, to today's podcast.
Thank you for having me. I've been on a podcast before.
Oh, Well, welcome to your first podcast, and we're delighted that it's with UKSG. So the first question that I wanted to ask you about was, what has your career journey been from leaving school to now?
I suppose in a lot of ways it's been quite traditional. So I did the whole school leaving, sixth form college, straight to university route. And then I graduated all the way back in 2002 now, which is much longer ago than I like to think about. And I didn't quite know what I was going to do, but being born and bred in Cambridge, there's quite a few libraries around here. I lose count, 100 and something.
Oh, gosh.
And actually, my mother suggested that I should apply for a temporary job in the university library in Cambridge, which was just, I think it was 12 weeks over the summer thing, just to kind of dip my toe in, get some money, see what the world was like. So I did that for, the whole summer after I graduated university, and it was just sort of an admin-y role. We were in the process of converting the paper catalogue to digital, and it was just going through and kind of comparing records to make sure that they were the right thing. So kind of lots of cross-checking. And then after that, I got a more permanent role in the university library. One was advertised while I was there, and I was lucky enough to get it. And I thought, I'll do this for a couple of years, get some office experience, get some kind of actual job experience, and then, I'll see what I want to do. And then my 2-year sort of temporary plan ended up being staying there for about 21 years, I think, in the end.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that didn't exactly go to plan, but it's not a bad thing. And then I was a junior library assistant for a few years, and then worked my way up to being a senior library assistant in the cataloguing department. Overall, worked in cataloguing probably about a decade, maybe just over. So probably about half my time at the university library. And then I was sort of looking around at other things, seeing what would come up. And there was a maternity leave cover for a deputy team leader at our reader services desk, which is the kind of welcome desk when you come into the university library. And I thought, well, this is a good chance to get customer service experience. Everyone always asks for that. And so I was lucky enough to get that. I did that for a year. A year in customer service was probably long enough, I have to say. I'm not sure I'd want to do that full time as a job. And then as that was coming to an end, they advertised a role in research support. So the research support department at the university library had only recently, I think, been set up, and it was kind of exciting. It was a developing area, and this job came up, and it kind of combined all of the things that I like doing. So teaching, research support, obviously, helping to professionally develop my colleagues. And I went for it, had absolutely no hope. I thought, well, I might as well chuck my hat in the ring. And by some miracle, I got that job. So I did that for a few years. And then unfortunately, that role got made redundant. There was a bit of a restructure. And so I did a bit of a sideways move to doing a similar thing, but supporting researchers instead of librarians. So I was actually the research support librarian for the physical sciences. Please don't ask me what the physical sciences are. Essentially all the stuff I was terrible at school. And that was just before the pandemic. So I worked in that role all the way through the pandemic. And then I started looking around at different things and kind of different things that would interest me. And the House of Commons job came up. And again, massive imposter syndrome. But I was sort of nagged into it by a friend who already worked at the House of Commons Library. So I mainly applied to keep her quiet. If she listens to this, she will know who she is. And again, by some miracle, actually got offered the job. And here I am.
Oh, wow. And I was just thinking your transition from cataloging to the frontline kind of stuff. Are there many other catalogers that you worked with that had moved into the frontline kind of customer service side of things?
Some, I mean, I know cataloging is traditionally the kind of quiet, retiring librarian's backroom
Yeah,
sort of job. I don't know if that's the case anymore. I think all jobs have an element of customer service, and certainly at the time, there were a lot of people who would kind of do like overtime essentially, or Saturday duties, or
definitely.
just
Yeah.
yeah, kind of filling in who would do it. As a regular job, less so, because I think it appeals to maybe two different
Yeah.
personality types, not wanting to do my cataloging colleagues any disservice. I will say it was a bit of a stretch for me personally, one that my family still don't believe that I did. I was the typical kind of quiet kid in class. This was always the feedback I got at parents' evenings, she's very quiet, and so, there's nothing wrong with that. So to actually go into customer service was a bit of a challenge, I think.
I
But
think though it does sort of demonstrate that, there are very distinct roles in libraries. They
mhm,
can have some crossover, but sometimes they are very different. And that is even in, a university library or even like frontlines, in a public library as well. It's always, there are lots of different people that have quite distinct roles, but you can kind of step over into other ones, even if it maybe isn't what you want to do forever. That was just interesting to me that you had done that, and I suppose it probably has helped in terms of it brings together all the skills you have to help with other roles. Um, During that 20 odd years that you were that you started out and then obviously you stayed at Cambridge, did you go to library school during that period? And if you did you enjoy it or find it useful, or would you recommend it to other people if you did do that?
yeah, so I did go eventually. Do some quick maths in my head, probably about 8 years after I started work there, for a mixture of reasons. Partly, I didn't actually know library school was a thing. When I first started working in libraries, I didn't know really anything about this world. It was never mentioned as a, a kind of formal career path. It was just kind of, I suppose, stereotypically something you did if you were the quiet person. There was always kind of that kind of expectation. Yeah, so I worked in the library for, yeah, about 7, 8 years before I went. Partly that was due to some caring responsibilities. I just didn't have the time to go to library school, never mind the money, to be honest. And
Yeah.
then partly it was because I was finding that as I was thinking, okay, libraries, I quite like this. This is something I would want to do as a career. I was applying for jobs and not getting them, and the feedback I was getting quite often was, well, the successful candidate has a library qualification and we have to make the cut off somewhere, which is understandable in some ways. If you've got 20 applicants for a job and 10 have a library qualification, then that's easy to make that distinction and that cut off. So it was partly, I freely admit, to get a bit of paper so I could actually get a job, but actually I ended up really enjoying it. So I did it distance in Aberystwyth,
Mhm.
which is quite a distance from Cambridge, about a 7-hour train journey from memory to get there, probably about as far away as you could get to go to library school at the time. And yeah, I did enjoy it because it opened my eyes to sort of different areas of librarianship and the profession. So before I went, it was very much, okay, I need to get this bit of paper so I can get a job in cataloguing and continue to do cataloguing until I retire. And actually, when I went, I thought, oh, actually, they're talking about kind of reader services and customer service. That's quite interesting, or reference support, or research work, or different types of librarianship, specialism, service development. And you do all the kind of different elements of it when you're at library school. I didn't enjoy the management module, I will admit. I met very few people who ever have. It's perhaps more of a general one than one that's specifically related to librarianship, although I have to say it is one that I have put into practice quite a lot. I suppose overall, I would recommend it, even if just for the kind of the practical. So many people have the qualification now. It doesn't hurt to have it when applying for jobs.
Yeah.
It can be a bit of a barrier to not getting one. I think that's That's becoming less true. But I think if you can, then there's a lot more different courses out there now, and it's a bit more accessible in terms of this kind of flexibility and things like that. So I would recommend it. I perhaps didn't do it for the right reasons initially, but I definitely got something out of it that was more than the bit of paper.
Do you know, I also did my when I was living in Norwich, I did my masters at Aberystwyth, so we can arm wrestle over who had the longer the longer journey. And I think you're right, though. That's an interesting point that at that time, and I think it might have been around the same time, there weren't as many options, whereas there are more options now in terms of doing things distance or online and in those sorts of spaces. So that's interesting. And I do remember similarly the management module, finding parts of it difficult. So that's a little trip down memory lane for myself as well. And I have to look back through my old papers. um, so what is something unexpected or interesting that has come up in your work?
There is so much I could talk about in answer to that, because I work in one of the most wonderful but weird places, I think, certainly in the country, if not the world. It's the Houses of Parliament are exactly as you sort of see. You know, you see them in films and you see them on TV and stuff. It's a gorgeous building. It's very much a working building, but it's kind of like being on a TV set some of the time, and it's just random stuff happens. So I got to go to the state opening was it last November? No, it must have been last summer. Which we can apply for tickets to go to that sort of thing. So I mean that was an interesting day. I got positioned outside next to I want to say they were the band of the Irish Guards playing their pomp and circumstance music, as you would think. But they got quite creative and they started doing genuinely like the hits from Top Gun and You've Got a Friend in Me from Toy Story. They
Oh,
did that.
wow.
This all available on YouTube because people never
Okay.
believe me. Pirates of the Caribbean, they did as well. And then when the King and Queen turned up, they went back into more normal music. And I got to see the Crown drive past in its own car. It was chauffeur driven, just the Crown in a car to Parliament, which is just bizarre to me. So I mean that was a interesting day, but probably not for kind of work related reasons. Probably the most interesting thing that's happened work-wise in the last 18 months or so I've been there is the election. Obviously, that was quite a big thing last summer. We were involved in lots of different elements of that. It's probably a good time to say we don't get any more warning working in Parliament than the rest of the world that an election's about to happen. There were maybe some murmurs on the morning before Rishi Sunak announced it that something was going on, but we don't like get advanced warning that an election is due. So we have to sort of prepare because we roughly know when it's going to happen. So there was lots of preparation kind of quietly behind the scenes, lots of planning. And then the election gets called and action stations happen. So we went straight into dissolution, which is when there are no MPs. So if your job is to support the work of MPs and there are no MPs, that changes the nature of your job, at least for a few weeks. I mean, that was quite interesting to see how research and information, which is the kind of formal name for the House of Commons Library, how that responds to it. So there's lots of emphasis on professional development. There's lots of visits and kind of reciprocal learning and things that go on. It's a chance
Okay.
to maybe catch up on some of the work you haven't had time to do when there are people in the way, for want of a better expression. So things like weeding book collections and sorting stuff out because you're not being bombarded with requests and things like that. And then there was the actual election itself. So some of my colleagues were involved in things like data collection, compiling biographies. My contribution was I actually got to spend the weekend after the election, so the Friday, Saturday, Sunday immediately post-election in Westminster, which was an odd experience. It was, yeah, just kind of electric, really, I suppose is the
Yeah.
word. And I'm not I don't have a background in politics. I'm not particularly interested in politics beyond the kind of normal citizenship, but it was really something else to be there and see it. So we were basically doing like inductions for MPs. So people who were in the first few days of this life-changing job, being there, showing them around, helping them get settled in, sorting out everything that needed to be sorted out for them. Yeah, that was probably the most interesting thing that's happened. It was tiring, it was absolutely exhausting, but you really feel like you've done something worthwhile at the end of the day, because I mean, hopefully you've set them on the right path to go off and do great things, etc. And being that
Yeah.
small part of democracy it's a really nice feeling.
That sounds incredible. It's just so, and because it was your first election, was there someone, like, obviously you have colleagues, but was there someone there to kind of steer what you were supposed to do? Like, if, because it is sort of, there's kind of rules along with it. Did you have to kind of lean into other colleagues that had been through it before?
Yeah, so Parliament's a really supportive place to work. I know that sounds like a line, but it is a really nice place to work, and they're very aware that, it's weird and it takes getting used to, and something like the election hopefully doesn't happen every day. So we had lots of training and support in the sort of months leading up to the election. But like I said, we didn't know when it was going to be, so we had to sort of do lots of training earlier in the year, because we knew it was going to happen sometime in 2024. And we did kind of the training, and there was a kind of a buddy system for the buddies, if you like, so we could all talk to each other and compare notes. And there was lots of support on the actual weekend, lots of people who had been through this before who were there to say, okay, all right, well, now you need to do this, or
Okay.
take them to this place, or answer questions. So it wasn't like we were expected to tell new
Yeah.
MPs exactly how everything in Parliament works. It was more like, and now I take you to this space, and this
Gotcha.
very knowledgeable person will tell you how the chamber works, or something like that. So,
Yeah. Oh, right. Oh, that, like I said, that's, yeah, I suppose we hear about stuff, but that inner workings of like what people need to know is really interesting as like as like as a normal person. But then I suppose MPs are normal people too, and they need
yes.
help to and
And
no, go
go
ahead.
on. I was going to say, this is something that a lot of people don't realize, and perhaps I didn't realize before I worked there. These are normal people. They are people trying to do a job under lots of different pressures. And the same as you would in academic libraries, I suppose, the library is always sort of cited as a recognizable space for new students coming in. They probably know what a library does, and they know what they can get out of a library. And I think it's the same for MPs. There's a whole language around Parliament, and oh, goodness, do we love an acronym? But we talk about even going into the chamber, or just trying to think of other strange things that we do and terms that we use. It can be very confusing, but you say library and people are like, yes, thank God, I actually know what a library is, and
Yeah,
I know what a library does. And
that's nice to know that that exists also within these political spaces, that the library is still seen as a place where you understand that
mhm.
you can go there for help and get information from people. I'm just curious, obviously you talked about the transition of governments. What was your transition like moving from a university library into the House of Commons? And what was there anything that was difficult to get used to, or things that you found surprising about it?
I think the thing that I found surprising was that there's so much overlap between Parliament, certainly, and an academic library. So it's about uh, supporting researchers to do their research, which then goes on to support MPs and their staff to do their work. And it's pretty similar to what I was doing before. So I hadn't anticipated that there would be quite so much that was similar. So even the parliamentary calendar, obviously it's slightly different, but they have, there's terms and there's recesses, which are like breaks, which roughly happen at the same time every year. So there's a summer recess, there's a Christmas recess. So similar that you would have academic breaks, and the kind of the rhythm of the year, the rhythm of the work is not dissimilar to working in academia. I think on a personal level, transitioning, I mean, I worked at Cambridge 21 years. So transitioning to a new institution and a new sector and a whole new level of work at the same time was a lot. So I went from a sector I was incredibly sure and incredibly comfortable in,
Mhm.
to something that was very, very different, very high profile, really, when you think about it. Worked in quite a different way in some ways, and going, leaving Cambridge and going to a completely different institution. So even like my daily life changed. So I have a much longer commute now, for instance, than I did before. And then going to leading a reasonably large team from kind of being a team member again, that was an adjustment. And it all came at one time, which I'm not entirely sure I would recommend. Luckily, everyone was very lovely and very understanding, but it was a lot of challenges at once. It was a bit like, ripping off the plaster. So might as well get it all over with in one go. Maybe it would have been better to do it in stages. I don't know, but I mean, this was the job. So
Yeah. And do you think, what advice would you give to someone that's wanting to develop their career in libraries, whether that is transitioning to a new space or the other things that you've spoken about, taking on that leadership role in an entirely different place? Do you have any advice to, people wanting to change what they're doing?
I think don't be afraid to try stuff that's different. I think a lot of, and certainly this is my experience, I was afraid for a long time to try something different in case it was a disaster, in case it didn't work. And luckily, so far anyway, everything has gone to plan at Parliament. But I mean, I was aware that it could have, gone completely wrong, and I could have been absolutely rubbish at it and hated every aspect of it. And I think that fear puts a lot of people off. So I would say it's probably better to at least once or twice just try something that scares you, and you might be surprised how it re-energizes you, really. And even if you end up not liking it in the end, even if it ends up being sort of a blip on your CV, I think as long as you can learn something out of it, even if what you learn is, if you went from, say, a school library to an academic library, and it turns out you actually hated academic libraries, at least you know that then. At least you've learned that about yourself. So don't be afraid to stretch yourself a little bit. Don't get too comfortable.
Yeah, and I think, like you said about taking off the plaster, I suppose if you don't try, you'll never like scratch that itch. You won't know what it was like, and to know if it's not for you or if it is for you if you never take that leap. So I think that's a nice thing. Now, I don't know if your current job is this, but you've had different library jobs. Claire, what would be your dream library or archives job?
I mean, I suppose I should really say the House of Commons, just in case my boss is listening to this. But I've seen two library jobs advertised, um, that I sort of live rent free in my brain. And so one was the Chawton House librarian, which I want to say is in Hampshire. I'm a big Jane Austen geek, really. Um, I love everything about Jane Austen, everything she's ever written, all the stuff about her. And there is a house connected to her, Chawton House. I think it belonged to her brother at one stage, and it's home to a library that focuses on women's fiction from the 17th to 19th century. And a few years ago, they did advertise a librarian role there, and I was like, well,
Oh,
I
wow.
wish I could. I really could. That one was perhaps slightly more practical. The other one that I always sort of go back to and think about is I once saw a job advertised as the Pixar librarian in California. And, working in Pixar and dealing with all the kind of information and archives around all of their animations, you just think how wonderful would that be? And the culture sounded very Californian, I have to say. So it's very laid back and exactly like you sort of see in all the movies. I could imagine them skateboarding down the halls and etc. This is probably a massive stereotype, but I'm not sure any of those would be the practical dream job. But there are the ones that I sort of think about. I mean, the real ones I sort of think about. Everyone has the fantasy of being the librarian of the library from Beauty and the Beast, I suppose, and the Mummy and things like that. But yeah, the
Oh,
Chawton House one is probably the one that I maybe wish I had applied for. I probably stood no chance of getting it, has to be said. But
oh, that's lovely though. I like the images though of you've got Jane Austen on one side and then you've got, Pixar and everything they do on the other side. And I suppose again, similar to what you do in the House of Commons, it's lovely to know that there's so many different spaces that require libraries and librarians and people to help, find information, whether it's animators or researchers or just Jane Austen enthusiasts, that want to know more. And yeah, it was lovely to hear about your experience at the House of Commons because I think again it's something that we know about, and I know I got to go to one of their days once and just found it, just fascinating. But I just appreciate you giving us a little peek into what you do and also your journey to getting there. So thank you very much, Claire. I appreciate you joining us today, and thank you and good luck with where the journey takes you next, whether that is Jane Austen or Pixar. Maybe they listen to this and that can be the next step.
Maybe they'll make a Pixar Jane Austen movie and we can combine the two.
There you go. Sounds good. Thanks again, Claire.
Thank you.
UKSG exists to connect the sector and encourage the exchange of ideas. It brings together the information community of librarians, publishers, intermediaries and technology vendors. If you know someone whose career journey would make for an interesting episode, please get in touch with UKSG via Twitter. Please like and share our podcast to help us support those in our community who are just starting their journey. And subscribe to the channel to keep up with future episodes.